Hello guys! So in this tutorial I'm gonna show you how to create the split screen effect to make your gameplay camera more immersive. And I've been recently rewatching Ocean's 13 and after that the Kill Bill, and found that hey, I can make a new tutorial, and let me show you a few clips of how actually the split screen look in movies. So here we have a few examples. It might be used in different situations, depends on the style of your game, or even if you make like the cinematic inside the Unreal, you can like make this one happen. And guys, before we start, in case you want to support me, you can always visit my Patreon page. Here you can, via the subscription, get the sample files from most of my tutorials and use them. My approach is based on having several scene capture components and obviously using the render target there to capture like the screen from our camera. Basically, scene capture component works as the camera, but with few like differences. And obviously we don't have an ability to get the view from the camera except that we switch on it. So to make this thing work, we also need to have the widget. So once we have the trigger overlapped, we can construct the widget, and there we can define the grid. It depends on your taste, but here for this tutorial I used two I found more suitable, like 3 equal parts and one big and 2 smaller images. You saw it at the beginning of this video. So here you may see all the files that we need to create. You need to have the nectar, which is called capture camera, and there we will have like the camera and scene capture component. Split trigger is an actor with the box collision, so we like if we overlap it, gather all the cameras that are nearby and tell them to start capturing. We also have the enumeration. Here we define the type of split we will use, like the type of widget we will use for our camera, obviously. And we have the split manager. It's the master widget inside which we define what type of like pre-made widget we will use on each overlap box. So here you can see we also have 2 folders. I call them properly, so split 1 big 2 small images and split 3 equal parts. Here you may see that we have in each 3 render targets and 1 widget. The widget are constructed the way so where each render target corresponds to each particular place, and each of our render target has its specific size, so it won't be stretched and we will get the exact pure results as we wanted. So now let's talk about our blueprint logic, and then we'll continue with our settings. So guys, we start with the split trigger. It's an actor with the box collision, and it has some changes inside the default state. So obviously we don't need to have like collision enabled. We ignore everything but overlap with our pawn. Next, on the construction here, I can have like dimensions exposed, so I can change the size of overlap box via the outliner here. Next is our begin play logic. So we gather the capture camera, it's our actor of camera, and set it to be then array. And then I check whether array has any child in it, and if it's so, I can create the split manager widget, the master widget, which contains all our split widgets, and then I'll enable collision. So without this one, our overlap simply won't work. Next, on begin and end overlap, I check whether the player pawn is the one that overlaps this box. If it's true, and this condition also validates that our array is full of cameras, we can iterate over each of them, and here, like on start overlap, we execute start capture. It's the function inside our capture camera. Here, I'm going to explain it a little bit later. And on the complete, we add our widget to our screen. So the same but opposite logic goes for the end overlap. So we stop capturing and we remove the widget from the parent. So what else? I also have like the split type exposed here. It's the enumeration that I created earlier, which defines the split type of the widget to have in the master widget. And as you can see, while I create the master widget, let me show you. Here I have the same type of variable, but it says expose and spawn. So once I create the widget, I can define the what type of split it should be. So I can use it there for the widget switcher. And this we'll talk about also a little bit further in the video. So collision enabled, but query only, because I don't need to have any physical interaction with my split trigger. Now let's talk about our capture camera. So here you may see that I have scene capture component. So, and the camera component. Camera component here is just for the sake to have the preview how the scene looks where we position our cameras here in our world outline. But they actually don't do anything, and all the capture goes with the scene capture. Here we need to set few flags, because without it, the results of the capture won't match our final scene in the game. So we need to set final color HDR with the linear sRGB, and we need to deselect capture every frame and on movement, because we need to activate these events on purpose. On the advanced flag, we can define what type of objects we need to capture, and the more we capture, the more expensive these methods or these mechanics will be. So it's up to you to decide what object to capture. In case you make the scene inside the maybe like the house or inside the room, you won't need to capture like the volumetric fog and etc. etc. So be aware of what you use, and probably that's it for this setup here. On the construction script here, I set the field of view of my scene capture and my preview capture the same way, so I can see how many space I'll be capturing. On the begin play, I call stop capture this event, because we don't need to have the tick enabled by default, and we use tick event here only in case our player pawn is valid. So in case we need to follow up our character, like in the Resident Evil or Dino Crisis, so, or maybe like the security camera, smooth transition of the camera towards our character, our pawn, really matters. And so as you can see, start capture, we enable tick, stop capture, we disable tick, and we also clear the render target that is used for the specific camera. Also, the scene capture component is updated with our render target that we expose to our outliner. So you may see I have few variables that should be changed via our outliner. It's the render target, the field of view, the ability to follow our target, lock on both axes that I think are the most useful, except of roll. Also have the aperture, sensor width, and focal distance, those essential elements that can help us build the dynamic depth of field or tilt shift effect and so on. So if in case you haven't seen my previous tutorials, please go and check them. I have lots of to talk about the camera and other stuff. Next thing, we use the post-process settings from our scene capture, and we override only those attributes that we need. In case we have the static camera, we define the aperture, sensor width, and focal distance. Next, on tick, we use capture scene. It's the default function from our scene capture component that starts drawing inside the render target. And in case we need to follow our character, we use set actor rotation with the function that I created. It's called calculate follow rotation. It looks like this. We get actor rotation, the rotation of our camera, stored to local pitch and yaw variables. Then we use find look at rotation with our camera and the character we are looking at. And we define within those two variables whether we need to have locked each of the axes, whether it's the pitch or yaw rotation, and return rotator. So we use it for our rotation of our actor, and in case we need to have like the dynamic depth of fields, tilt shift or other stuff with the scene depth, we override the focal distance depending on the distance between our character and the camera. I've made two, let me say it, prefabs. So it's predefined widget for two types of splits. The one you see here, which have like one big and two smaller one, and I also have 3 equal parts. For this one, I use the horizontal box as the holder, image big as the equal parts corresponding to those two, like the smaller on top and the bottom. This one is container of the vertical box, which contains 2 images. And as you may see from the details panel, each image here corresponds to a specific render target texture. To maintain the same aspect ratio and so your image won't be stretched in any way, as I work with the 1080 resolution, this render target, for example, the split 1 big, is set to be 960 by 1080. So if you multiply 960 by 2, it will return 1920. And similar logic goes for any render target for this feature. So the smaller bottom and the smaller top, they have 960 by 540. Also, there is one thing that you should keep in mind. Here, inside the render target format, you should define RGB8S. So this one, because without this, the scene capture will return a different result from the final color of your main camera. So the size defines the resource size that we have of our render target. So it costs much, but in case you make the narrative game and you want to have this kind of split, the easiest way, simple doesn't exist. So it might cost in few things, few FPS, but immersive camera really worth it. So here we have one widget, here we have another one, and as you may see, each widget has its own render target set. So split left, split center, split right. So if you take a look at the folders that we have the widget render targets. So they correspond to their particular asset. So in case we have like the equal one, they all share like 640 by 1080, but correspond to each particular index inside the widget. Next thing is to have the master widget, which is called split manager, that we create in our split trigger here. And it looks like this. Here we have the border, which is our black background. So you may see that I have the brush color set to be nearly the perfect black. Here we have the widget switcher. It's the service widget that help us to deal with switching between the childs that we have here in our hierarchy. So basically the first one is index 0, and it corresponds to the equal 3 parts. The index of 1 is 1 big too small. So if you remember our enumeration here, our first index here, which is 0 index, corresponds to the widget that we need to set to our master widget here. So split 3 here. So in case you want to have your custom split widget, each time you add it to this enumeration, like the index should be the same here and here. And on the graph, when the widget is constructed, as you may see, I have split type exposed. I told you earlier. I simply set active widget index with this kind of permutation. So we simply pull a wire from our enumeration and type int to int byte, and this will actually return the proper index for our widget to switch the child widget. So my scene sets the following way. I have the split screen trigger here, which has dimensions 800 by 200 by 200. So it looks like this. I have split type equal 3, and once I have this one, I should keep in mind that equal 3 works with the specific type of render target. So I place cameras, and I know that there should be 3 cameras. So for each camera, I define what type of render target should use. So if I use the equal 3, I need to define, for instance, split left render target, which will mean that the capture from this camera will go to our left part of the widget. Same goes for our camera number 2, it's the center, and camera number 3, it's our right. And I can also define like the field of view, follow target, lock, pitch, yaw, and so on, define the aperture, sensor width, and focal distance. Probably you won't see this, so I need to like put myself here, so you see my settings. So here, and here, they all have different field of views, and to make them all have like perfectly blurred bokeh, we can adjust the sensor width to be the higher, so like for 144, and to lower the aperture, and that's how it looks. So next thing is that once you change the split of your split screen trigger to other one, in case you don't change the targets inside your cameras, you may see that nothing works. So please go ahead and do the following. So in case you want the left one to be your biggest one, select your big render target. Do the same for the smaller one. So top and bottom. Actually, guys, the easiest way to maintain this work fine, as I said, simply doesn't exist. And now you see what we have here. So I hope guys you like this tutorial. As always, you're welcome to support me via Patreon, subscribe to my channel, like my videos, leave your feedback, and see you soon with some good news, guys. See ya.